So imagine a factory in Detroit where a robotic arm encounters a slightly misaligned transmission part on an assembly line.
Okay.
It hesitates for a fraction of a second, analyzes the anomaly, and then flawlessly adjusts its grip to fix the issue.
Hmm.
And it does this using a specific complex spatial maneuver that was literally invented 3 seconds earlier by a completely different robot in Munich.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. That isn't a pitch for a science fiction movie. That is a reality that just went live this month. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are pulling from a massive stack of source material. We've got tech release notes, dense legal frameworks, hardware specs, industry analyses, all to map out a market that has completely rewritten its own rules in just a matter of weeks.
It's been a truly wild month.
It really has. Our mission here is to give you a clear, digestible understanding of the AI landscape as of April 2026, because, well, the ground truth has fundamentally changed.
It has. And the overarching theme in these sources is this incredibly aggressive transition. We are completely leaving behind the era of, general AI experimentation.
Yeah, the basic chatbots.
Right. The days of simply playing around with a chatbot in a browser, those are over. The industry has pivoted hard to hyper-specialized, agentic, and even physical AI. And the only reason the software evolution is even possible is because of a staggering leap in the underlying physical hardware that just hit the market.
Okay, let's start right there with the hardware, because before we can talk about software models that write their own code or robots that learn instantly, we really have to look at the engines powering them.
Exactly.
The foundation.
Yeah, the sheer scale of the infrastructure being deployed right now is honestly difficult to wrap your head around. NVIDIA just pushed their Blackwell Ultra GPU and the GB200 NVL72 system into mass production.
Which is a massive milestone.
Right. And the sources list some wild specifications here. It's got 288 gigabytes of HBM3E memory, a dual die design, and a 10 terabyte per second internal bandwidth. But I want to stop for a second because dual die sounds like, pure marketing speak.
Yeah, it does sound like a buzzword. Okay, let's unpack this. What is physically happening on that chip, and why is it delivering 40 times the performance of the last generation?
Well, to understand the performance leap, you really have to look at the historical bottleneck in AI computing. The problem usually isn't how fast the processor can do the math.
Okay.
The problem is getting the massive amounts of data to the processor fast enough so it isn't just, sitting there waiting. That's what we call the memory wall.
Oh, I see.
So a dual die design essentially means NVIDIA figured out how to print two separate GPU brains onto a single physical piece of silicon. And they wired them together so seamlessly that they operate as one giant unified engine.
Wait, really? So there's no lag?
There is zero communication lag between them. None.
And I assume that's where that crazy 10 terabyte per second internal bandwidth comes into play.
Precisely. That bandwidth, utilizing that HBM3E, which just stands for high bandwidth memory, is the highway connecting the memory to the processor. NVIDIA has widened that highway to such a ridiculous degree that the chip can ingest, process, and output data at speeds that completely alter what a model can do in real time.
Wow.
Yeah, 40 times the performance isn't just an incremental update. It completely changes the economic equation of training a model. But NVIDIA is actually only half the hardware story this month.
Right. The other half is the money. We are looking at a mega deal between Amazon and Anthropic that totally redefines corporate spending. Anthropic just committed to spending over $100 billion over the next 10 years.
Exclusively on AWS technology.
Exclusively on AWS, yeah. They're going to heavily utilize Amazon's custom silicon, the Trainium and Graviton chips, instead of just relying entirely on NVIDIA. And in exchange, Amazon is injecting an additional $5 billion into Anthropic today, with a structured plan to scale that up to $20 billion.
The financial commitment is massive, sure, but the physical manifestation of that deal is what really demands our attention.
You mean Project Rainier?
Exactly. They are jointly building out a compute cluster called Project Rainier. This single infrastructure project features nearly 500,000 Trainium2 chips. It is actively training and deploying Anthropic's new generation of Claude models as we speak.
Okay, let's unpack this because I need to push back on the scale of this. The energy requirements detailed in our sources are just staggering. Anthropic is securing up to 5 gigawatts of capacity to train and run these models.
Yeah, 5 gigawatts is an immense amount of power.
Let's ground that number for you. 1 gigawatt can power roughly 750,000 homes. So 5 gigawatts is drawing the energy equivalent of a major metropolitan city, like a massive one.
It is.
Are we just building data centers at this point, or are we essentially building digital nation states? I mean, is drawing 5 gigawatts of power for one company's software even a sustainable reality on our current power grids?
Well, that is the defining tension of the industry right now. Sourcing 5 gigawatts isn't just about, plugging into the local grid. It requires dedicated nuclear agreements, massive geothermal investments, and completely novel cooling infrastructure.
It's an entire parallel grid.
Exactly. But to understand why companies are willing to take on that logistical nightmare, you have to look at what that power is buying them. You don't need a 5 gigawatt cluster to make a customer service chatbot reply a few milliseconds faster.
Right.
You need that power because the nature of the software has fundamentally changed. The models are no longer just predicting the next word in a sentence based on pattern recognition. They are running complex, multi-step simulations. They are actually reasoning.
So if a company is drawing the power of a major city to run these chips, the software has to fundamentally change to justify that cost, which explains exactly what we're seeing with the frontier models released this month.
Moving from passive tools to active agents.
Yes, exactly. Let's look at Google's Gemini 3.1 Pro, which is currently rolling out globally. The standout metric here is its score on the ARC AGI-2 benchmark. It scored 77.1%, which literally doubles the performance of the previous generation.
Which is huge.
It is. But what makes the ARC AGI-2 benchmark different from, say, the AI taking a standardized test like the bar exam?
Well, traditional benchmarks often fell victim to contamination. Like, if you feed an AI all of human knowledge, of course it's going to pass the bar exam. It has practically memorized the answers during its training phase.
It's an open book test at that point.
Exactly. But the ARC AGI-2 benchmark is entirely different. It generates novel, abstract logic puzzles that the AI has never seen before. There is no training data to pull from.
Oh, wow.
The model has to deduce the underlying rules of a completely new environment and apply them perfectly. So doubling the score on that specific test proves a massive leap in raw, generalized reasoning capabilities.
And Google is weaponizing that reasoning across their entire ecosystem. They've launched personal intelligence, which, by the way, is currently free for US users. Right?
It doesn't just search the web. It actively reasons across your private Gmail, your Google Photos, and your YouTube history to synthesize personalized workflows. And even more aggressively, they're previewing an auto-browse feature in Chrome.
That's the one where it essentially drives the browser itself.
Yes. The browser is literally navigating pages, clicking buttons, filling out forms, and compiling research autonomously while you just watch.
And that level of autonomous execution requires massive context windows, which is the amount of information the AI can hold in its working memory at any given second.
Right.
Which is why xAI's launch of the Grok 4.1 fast model is so disruptive to the market. Yeah. They released a model with a 2 million token context window, but they priced it at just 20 cents per million input tokens.
That's incredibly cheap.
It is. They're effectively commoditizing massive memory, allowing developers to feed entire databases or hundreds of system logs into the AI for absolute pennies. But the undisputed heavyweight release in our sources this month is Anthropic's Claude Opus 4.7. It went generally available on April 16th, and the benchmarks are fascinating, specifically the coding leaps. It hit 87.6% on SWE Bench Verified.
Yeah, that score is unheard of.
And to achieve that, Anthropic introduced a new system setting called the X-High Effort Level. Let's unpack SWE Bench Verified, because it's not a multiple-choice coding quiz, right?
Not at all. SW Bench Verified forces the AI to act like a senior software engineer. The model is given a real, complex, unresolved issue from a massive open-source GitHub repository.
Yeah.
It has to navigate the existing code base, understand how thousands of files interact, isolate the bug, write the patch, run the unit tests, and submit a pull request that perfectly resolves the issue without breaking anything else.
That is wild.
Hitting an 87.6% success rate on that implies a level of autonomy we just haven't seen before. And the mechanism driving that success is a new architectural feature Anthropic calls self-verification.
Okay, so how exactly does self-verification work under the hood? Because the marketing says it checks its own work, but what is the actual process happening on those Trainium2 chips?
It's essentially a hidden internal loop. When you give Claude Opus 4.7 a complex prompt on that X-high effort setting, it doesn't immediately start typing an answer to you.
Right.
Instead, it generates a secondary internal monologue. It writes a draft of the code, and then a separate instance of the model acts as a rigorous critic reviewing that code.
Like it's grading its own paper.
Exactly. It writes simulated tests, spots its own logic flaws, fails, iterates, and rewrites the code entirely, sometimes leaping dozens of times. It does all of this heavy cognitive lifting behind the scenes before it ever outputs a single character to your screen.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Which brings us to a fascinating hidden cost catch hidden in the release notes. I want to look at Anthropic's pricing strategy for this because it feels a bit deceptive.
How so?
Well, the sticker price for Opus 4.7 is exactly the same as the previous version, $5 per million input tokens. But they quietly updated the tokenizer, the system that chops up your words into pieces the AI can read.
Ah, yes. The tokenization shift.
Right. This new tokenizer produces up to 35% more tokens for the exact same block of text. So keeping the price per token the same, but artificially inflating the token count by a third. That's like an airline telling you the ticket price hasn't changed, but they just shrank the allowed carry-on size by 35%. You're paying the same base rate, but getting significantly less mileage out of it.
That airline analogy is perfectly accurate. It's a slightly opaque method to offset the astronomical compute costs we were just talking about earlier.
Because of all that internal monologue.
Exactly. When a model utilizes self-verification, all of that hidden looping and simulated testing requires compute. The AI is churning through tokens in the background to refine its answer. The shift toward agentic behavior means you aren't just paying for the final output anymore. You are paying for the invisible cognitive labor the machine performs to guarantee that output is correct.
Wow, okay.
And this computational weight is exactly why Anthropic is keeping their ultimate flagship model, Claude Mythos Preview, entirely restricted to enterprise partners right now. Sourcing the compute to run that level of internal reasoning for the general public would crash the system.
So these models are getting incredibly heavy, highly capable, and extremely expensive to run, which naturally means they are migrating out of the consumer browser and being hardwired directly into deeply specialized high-revenue industries.
The vertical AI trend.
Yeah, a massive surge in vertical AI. OpenAI's latest move perfectly illustrates this. They just launched GPT-Rosalind.
Named appropriately after Rosalind Franklin, the pioneering DNA researcher.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not a general chatbot that just knows a lot about biology. It is a highly specialized engine built to tackle a very specific bottleneck in medicine, the 10 to 15-year gap between discovering a biological target and actually getting a drug approved.
Right.
OpenAI is partnering directly with pharmaceutical titans like Amgen, Moderna, and Novo Nordisk.
The key to GPT-Rosalind isn't just generating text, though. It's simulating complex molecular interactions and reasoning through vast data sets of clinical trial outcomes. But this raises the most critical hurdle in enterprise AI today.
And the security aspect.
Absolutely. Amgen and Moderna are not going to upload their proprietary multi-billion-dollar molecular research into a public LLM. Having a brilliant reasoning engine is entirely useless if it cannot securely and privately interact with a company's internal data.
Which makes Mistral AI's announcement this month perhaps the most important software release for everyday businesses. Mistral released Studio connectors, which are built on something called a Model Context Protocol, or MCP. How does MCP solve that security nightmare?
Well, the Model Context Protocol essentially acts as a secure, standardized bridge. Instead of pulling the company's private HR data or custom CRM databases into the AI's core model, MCP allows the AI to send specific, heavily encrypted queries directly to the enterprise data silos.
Oh, so it just dips in, gets what it needs, and leaves.
Exactly. It gets the exact context it needs to answer a prompt and then severs the connection. The data never leaves the company's secure environment, and the AI never trains on it.
And Mistral took it a step further by focusing heavily on governance with their direct tool calling. They introduced a feature explicitly called requires confirmation.
The human-in-the-loop feature.
Yes, exactly. It is a hard-coded, human-in-the-loop approval flow. The AI can analyze your CRM, draft a complex strategy, and propose an action like, say, altering a financial database or sending an email blast to 1,000 clients. But it physically cannot execute that action until a human clicks a button to approve it. It's a literal pause button coded right into the workflow. So what does this all mean for the everyday worker?
It reveals a massive shift in what constitutes a high-value skill in the modern workforce. Generating the content or writing the code is no longer the premium skill, The AI does that faster and better.
Right.
The truly valuable career skill right now is architectural. It is the ability to securely integrate these massive reasoning engines into existing messy enterprise networks like a custom Google workspace or a legacy HR platform and design safe workflows.
Building the guardrails.
Exactly. You design systems where the AI handles the heavy cognitive lifting, but human judgment serves as the unbypassable secure checkpoint for any sensitive execution.
But the AI's execution isn't just limited to software databases anymore. The digital intelligence is finally crossing the barrier into physical space. At the Hannover Messe trade show in Germany, a company called Agile Robots debuted their physical humanoid, the Agile 1.
And we need to be really clear here that this is not a pre-programmed robotic arm doing a repetitive weld, nor is it like a sci-fi prototype doing backflips on a stage.
That's just for actual work.
Yes. Agile 1 is a bipedal humanoid designed explicitly for the factory floor, built to navigate messy, unpredictable physical environments alongside human colleagues.
It's powered by an AI software platform called Agile Core, which is heavily backed by partnerships with Google DeepMind and Deutsche Telekom. But the element that absolutely stands out in the source material is the continuous hive mind learning.
The instant adaptation.
Yeah, it brings us right back to the scenario we started with. We are talking about physical AI.
Yeah.
If a human worker drops a specific type of screw, they learn to adjust their grip, right?
Naturally.
But if an Agile 1 robot in a facility in Munich drops that screw, it doesn't just adjust its own behavior. The Agile Core system instantly processes that edge case, updates the spatial reasoning model, and downloads that physical experience to every single Agile 1 robot across the globe in real time.
It's incredible.
It really is. The robot in Detroit instantly knows how to hold the screw perfectly without ever having made the mistake itself.
Which is why industry leaders are classifying this as the catalyst for the next industrial revolution. I mean, for 50 years, industrial robotics has been defined by rigid repetition. A machine executes the exact same physical path millions of times.
And if something is slightly off, it fails.
Right. If a part on the conveyor belt is misaligned by 2 inches, the machine breaks it or halts production. But when you integrate the spatial reasoning and visual acuity of frontier models like the 98.5% visual score we saw on Claude 4.7 with high-end physical actuators, you completely eliminate that fragility.
Wow.
Yeah, these physical AI systems can perceive the misaligned part, reason through the geometry of the problem, and dynamically adjust their physical movements to solve the edge case autonomously.
But inevitably, when you have multinational companies building 5-gigawatt compute clusters and software agents browsing the web autonomously and humanoid robots sharing physical intelligence on factory floors, governments tend to get incredibly nervous.
To put it mildly.
Right. The global regulatory response right now is chaotic, to say the least. Unprecedented capabilities are inviting unprecedented and completely divergent global scrutiny.
The fragmentation of the global rulebook is perhaps the biggest friction point for the market right now. Looking at our legal sources, we see vastly different philosophies playing out simultaneously.
Especially in the U.S.
Yes. In the United States, New York just signed the RAISE Act. This is a very heavy-handed approach targeting frontier AI developers, specifically any organization with over $500 million in revenue. It mandates strict internal risk assessments, massive transparency reports, and crucially, demands that any critical safety incident be reported to the state within 72 hours, backed by severe financial penalties.
But at the exact same time, you look at Colorado. While New York is dropping a legislative hammer, the governor of Colorado is proposing a revised bill to actively narrow their state's AI regulations.
Right, they are going in the opposite direction.
Exactly. They are stripping out the heavier transparency burdens and annual impact assessments that were previously proposed. You have a completely divergent regulatory philosophy happening within the borders of a single country.
And when you zoom out to the international stage, the disparity becomes even more pronounced. The UK's Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, the DRCF, just published a white paper that completely ignores chatbots.
Interesting. What are they focused on?
They are explicitly targeting agentic AI. They are warning about the unique economic risks that arise when AI systems bundle actions autonomously, highlighting a specific fear of collusion.
Wait, like AI monopolies?
Sort of. They are worried about different AI pricing agents quietly communicating and price fixing in a market without any human direction.
Meanwhile, Egypt is taking a more structural, foundational approach, publishing a 4-tier, risk-based governance framework to categorize systems from minimal risk all the way up to prohibited systems. But then you look at China's latest draft guidance.
That one is very specific.
Yes. Their cybersecurity standards body is explicitly targeting open-source agentic AI, specifically the OpenClaw models. They aren't just advising organizations to limit access to sensitive data. They are actively warning corporate IT departments to hunt down shadow agents.
Shadow agent?
Yeah. These are unapproved, rogue AI bots deployed secretly by a company's own employees to automate their personal workloads. So what happens to a global tech market when UK regulators are worrying about AI bots secretly colluding with each other, while Chinese authorities are telling IT departments to hunt down rogue shadow agents running on employee laptops?
Well, it generates an almost insurmountable compliance labyrinth for any multinational tech company trying to deploy a global product. And while we, remain entirely impartial on the political or legislative merits of these specific frameworks, the underlying shift in regulatory focus is undeniable.
It's moving away from the text generators.
Exactly. Global authorities have stopped reading about what the AI says, the hallucination risks or bias of a chatbot. Their focus is now firmly and perhaps permanently fixed on what the AI does. The regulatory eye is locked on autonomous execution, market intervention, and physical robotics.
And that perfectly synthesizes the massive shifts we've explored today. The through line here is undeniable. We are looking at massive city-scale compute investments from Amazon and NVIDIA that are fueling hyper-capable reasoning models like Grok 4.1, Gemini 3.1 Pro, and Claude 4.7.
Which are completely changing the game.
Right. And we are watching those generalized models get molded into deeply specialized enterprise tools like GPT-Rosalind for biotechnology, and physically embodied into continuous learning humanoids like the Agile One on the factory floor. And all of this is moving at a velocity that has global regulators scrambling to write the rules of the road while the car is already driving itself.
The velocity of this transition leaves us with a rather profound structural question to consider for the future.
What's that?
We discussed Mistral coding that pause button into enterprise AI, right?
Yeah.
Requiring a human to manually confirm an action.
Yeah, the human in the loop.
But if we are rapidly entering a paradigm where AI models write their own code, run their own simulated tests, verify their own logic, and execute complex physical and digital workflows autonomously at speeds we can barely comprehend, at what point does that human-in-the-loop transition from being a vital safety guardrail to becoming the primary crippling bottleneck in the entire system?
Oh, wow. If the machine is reasoning 10 times faster than the person paid to approve its work, the pause button basically becomes a liability.
Exactly.
That is a fascinating tension to leave you on. Well, that's all for today's deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, and we'll catch you next time.